All right, everybody. Welcome to today's Learning Academy call. I don't necessarily think we're going to use the upper limit of our time slot today, but we have it if we need it. I really wanted to take the next hour and change, maybe a little bit less, to cover some key areas around OSHA visitation, recordability, and reporting. While our industry and in what we do is highly regulated, I think all of us know that it's pretty obvious. But a lot of the time we're hearing from a lot of regulators other than OSHA. But OSHA is very relevant in what we do, and we do get visited by OSHA from time to time, and it's really important that we're prepared for those interactions. For a number of reasons that we'll dive into. In addition, all of us are measured by a number of KPIs, and we track our performance toward perfection and the pursuit of continuous improvement in safety, but with both leading indicators and lagging indicators. And one of those lagging indicators is recordable injury rate and a lost time experience rate, or LTIF. And I'm not sure we've always done the greatest job of communicating what those mean and how those are calculated. I'm a firm believer that if we're being measured against something, then all of us should have a clear understanding of what those mean to us, and so that we can communicate that to the teams that we lead as well. So today we're going to talk about what to expect in an OSHA inspection, the consequences of an inspection from nirvana, which would be the absence of any citation, 0 citations from a visit, to okay, well, we did get a citation, and how do we navigate that process? We're going to talk about the RAR. What is it? How is it calculated? And we're actually going to go through several exercises of determining whether a injury is what will be considered a OSHA recordable injury or not. So before we get into an inspection guide, of course, the Occupational Safety and Health Administration is an agency of the Department of Labor. Can anybody tell me what act actually created OSHA?
If I Google it, I can.
quickly Google. The Occupational Safety and Health Act was what created OSHA. Anybody guess what year it was created? I hear typing.
1936.
70.
1971.
Who said 70?
70, yeah.
70?
Yes.
December 29th, 1970. And by what president enacted or was able to deliver this act?
Richard Nixon.
That is right.
God.
I think you cheated on Google, though.
A Cuban said that. Oh, my son
Guys
is
are
doing
quick
some
with the
history.
Google, man.
Let me tell you,
My
Google is the best.
talking about that years, that frame of years this morning. 70, Nixon, 69 to 74.
Yeah, it was Richard Nixon, former President Richard Nixon, December 29, 1970, and the Occupational Safety and Health Act created OSHA, which really its sole purpose is promoting workplace safety by a number of outreach programs, in addition to certainly enforcing workplace safety through regulation and citation, both in the civil environment, but also through criminal. They can exercise both forms of penalties, although criminal penalties are quite rare. So let's talk about a OSHA inspection, right? So this document that I'm going to be sharing with you now, I will be distributing after the call, so you don't necessarily need to take copious notes or try to screen capture. This will be housed on our intranet, and Steve, certainly be one of those documents that we would upload to our fantastic, magical document management system, in the coming months, as well. So OSHA inspections, they are performed for very purposeful, reasons, and that an OSHA inspector can't just say, well, look, my afternoon is free. I don't have a Learning Academy call today, so I'm going to go do an inspection in Newark, or I'm going to go do an inspection in Philadelphia today. No, they have to have a very specific reason, and generally falling into these 4 categories or bulleted categories on the screen now. One of those is imminent danger, meaning that conditions or practices exist that there is a high likelihood or high probability of a death or serious physical harm to employees. And they may find out about that for a number of reasons. That could be through an informal or formal complaint. It could be in observation, either through an innocuous, a visit or outreach call from another business, and they just so happen to see the behavior or the condition exists across the field, so to speak. But imminent danger is one of the triggers. A fatality or catastrophic, investigation. So what does that mean? Well, if in the event, any unlikely event, in the tragic event of an employee fatality, or in for a serious injury, one in whereby we would have an employee staying overnight at a hospital, as an example, we have to actually notify OSHA in those circumstances. And as a result, they could exercise their right, their privilege to follow up and visit a facility given that circumstance. Thirdly, a OSHA inspection could result from a formal or informal complaint. Now, informal and informal complaints, there's a lot of statutory rules around that, what makes them informal or formal. But the bottom line is, these complaints could come from an employee, it could come from a customer. They are generally no names are used, unidentified callers in many cases, and those calls being picked up by a local or regional OSHA office, whether it's a federal OSHA office or state run OSHA program like Cal OSHA. They have a state-run program. Many states do these these days. That OSHA inspector, based on the call and the detail and the potential and severity of risk that's being communicated, that complaint could be resolved via a letter that we respond to remotely, or they could prompt them to actually visit a facility. And finally, and it is probably the most broad, is a programmed inspection. And so it's a very general, statement. They've got a lot of latitude to decide. But given the information from OSHA 300 logs, and OSHA 300 logs, they catalog our more serious injuries. So those in which that are OSHA recordable, which we'll cover in a bit more detail a bit later in the call. Those rates are cataloged across all businesses, all industries, and submitted each year to the Bureau of Labor Statistics. And so for those outliers, so let's say it's a specific industry or particular group or region within within that industry, they can do what's called program inspections or targeted visits based on those outliers. And so really, it's those 4 categories that would drive an OSHA inspection. And again, they have to have a reason for coming into your facility. They have to be able to communicate what that reason is prior to actually conducting the visit as well, which we'll get into in just a few minutes. Any questions about what may trigger an OSHA inspection?
Hey Gino, I don't have a question about triggering it, but I noticed on here it's on the bullet point about regular complaint that they show up unannounced. is a regular complaint like if they would be, something would be mailed in or somebody went in person to complain about something? Is that when that would trigger that?
It could either both could trigger it. It's really up to the inspector and regional office to make that decision based on the perceptive risk that comes across based on the letter, phone call, or if an individual decided to actually go to an OSHA office to make the complaint. All of those things could trigger either one.
Okay, thank you.
But if you get an inspection, it's pretty rare for them to announce their visit. We consider it very lucky if you are provided advance notice. Now, based on, go ahead.
Well, like I'll just say from my past experience, though, I kind of find it to be the opposite of that.
Mm-hmm.
But there's been triggers. The triggers have been, we've had a major injury occur, or we've had somebody that has contacted them via the phone. So we've had several instances over the years as Metro Air Service where we've had to respond to different alleged complaints and so forth. And some of those have resulted in a visit, and some of those have resulted in where we receive a letter. And then what happened is I would work with Frank, and I would work together with the base to respond to those letters. And a lot of it is key in, how you respond on whether you actually ever even see a visit or not, if you have that opportunity the first time. So yeah. I've never been involved in anything from my business side where we've had just an unannounced somebody from OSHA shows up and we're like, oh crap, now what do we do? Knock on wood.
So that, Bob, is actually a testament, to leadership, because, in those cases, based on the complaint or based on, the trigger, being an employee, injury, the local office decided to respond to that through a letter, and based on the standard of care, the level of rapport that was generated based on the good faith of the employer, and that's a reflection of you, a reflection of the local team, it's a reflection of Frank. As an example, they were satisfied with the mitigations that were presented. So that's actually really encouraging and what you really want to see. But they can decide either way. They can either start out with a letter, or they're going to start out with a inspection. And if they start out with the inspection, it's very rare that they're going to give you a significant amount of notice at all. Now, they may make exception to unique businesses that are not clearly open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So for MAS, they may clearly communicate, hey, look, we understand that your hours of operation are in the evening, so they don't just show up at the front door at noon and no one's present.
Right. Well, I think the clear takeaway is, there are many ways that OSHA can reach out to us, including the unannounced visitors, and we just have to be prepared for them at all times. Absolutely.
And really, when the inspection, takes place, whether it is on paper or in person, but particularly in person, preparation is key to making that positive impression. We want to be able to demonstrate a level of our standard of care, be able to demonstrate and be able to gain a level of good faith from OSHA, because that's going to go a long way to how they interact with us and respond throughout that process. So it's really important that you immediately contact your Air and Regional STC manager for guidance regarding an OSHA inspection, should you be made aware of one. If your area regional STC is not available, please contact Kel directly. And if you can't contact Kel, please reach out to me. As we've mentioned, once a inspection is ultimately, once the office has decided, the OSHA local and regional offices decide that an inspection is going to take place, most times those inspections are not announced. They want to get a clear indication of how business is ran, so that you don't have time to sort of prep in the heat of the moment, or paint the facility before they arrive, et cetera, et cetera. So having a plan of action beforehand is really, really important. And for our station leadership, and supported by area and regional staff, it really is important to ensure that you know the location and are prepared to explain your OSHA 300 log. You have a current and previous 2 years. You know how to access the SMS manual. You know how to access your SOP manual and other relevant operational manuals as well. Having those things, knowing where those things are day to day for just generally general running of our business is important. But certainly in these inspections, it's also incredibly important to coming out of that inspection successfully. When we talk about some procedures and some best manager practices around an inspection, when the inspector arrives, it's important to have a waiting area for the inspectors someplace while we're gathering certain things, organizing the right people to escort, et cetera, that we have a designated area for this individual to wait. You never want to allow an OSHA inspector to roam around, without an assigned, escort. First of all, they shouldn't do that anyway. But if you allow them to roam, they're likely going to roam and to see what they can see, so to speak. The inspector will most likely request, a number of documents. They may ask for, for copies. And in most cases, they're going to get copies of that documentation. Now, we would need to certainly heavily coordinate, ensure that we're in constant contact with corporate safety. Likely Laura and I will be talking, along the way, as well. But in most cases, when you have an on-site OSHA inspector and they're requesting certain things like the OSHA 300 log, the SMS, or other documentation, it's not a typical request, and we're not going to respond in a timeline that we all feel more comfortable with. Meaning that there's a formal email that goes into corporate, and then corporate approves it, and then those documents go out. Those documents have to be released much faster. And so the coordination with the area STC regional, myself and Laura, needs to be much more in real time. But by and large, what they ask for, they are going to get. And so what's also really important is whatever they're getting copies of, we're making an identical file that looks like exactly the same. And so what I mean by that is this. So they say, look, I want your OSHA 300 log, which is a reasonable request. So we get our OSHA 300 log and we make 2 copies of that log. One of those copies is going to go to the inspector, and one of those is going to go to this file, OSHA visit XYZ, and go into this folder over here that we're going to keep. And then they may say, well, I want a copy of your safety management system, right, or your safety management manual. Okay, you're going to go to the copier, you're going to go to the printer, and you're going to print off 2 copies again. And again, one of those copies is going to go to the OSHA inspector, and the other copy is going to go into this, this folder that you conveniently started to put together, so that when the OSHA inspector leaves, we have an exact copy of what we provided to them. Not just a list of what we provided to them, but an exact copy. Does everybody follow me on that one?
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Really important, because that comes in handy, later on. But that's really important. So the other piece of this, and it sounds really obvious, but make sure we have a specific PPE available. If the inspector is going to be required to wear PPE wherever we are escorting them. That sounds really obvious, but you'd be surprised. I have experienced in my career where this has not taken place, and we've actually received a citation, because of it. So you need to be very meticulous, about that. It certainly sets the tone, on how we lead safety in our organization. So please make sure that, we keep that in mind before we start escorting, the OSHA inspector, around. If they're going to go in the GSE shop, they have to have certain PPE. If they're going to be on the ramp, they have to have a vest on, et cetera. Upon receipt of any citations, we certainly need to notify Kel, immediately. And if he's not, available, then please, reach out to me directly. The receipt of citations will not be the same day if citations are relevant. Those would come later, most likely via the mail. And they may actually, send them to the corporate office, which has also happened on occasion. But please, if you're made aware of citations, we need to know about them immediately, because there are follow-up actions that have timestamps associated with them. And we want to make sure we have every opportunity to demonstrate our standard of care. But also at the same time, we want to be able to fight the good fight and be able to demonstrate conformity and challenge the citations where appropriate. I think it goes without saying that, actions to take while escorting an inspector, we want to be courteous and professional, right? We want to just exercise, our good leadership, our values, as a business. And so we want to be courteous and professional. We need to be reasonable in terms of timing, right? It's understood, and the inspector should understand that, look, if they show up to the front door unannounced, it may take a little bit of time to do certain things around escort paperwork or otherwise to get them on, onto the field. But we need to be reasonable with that. It can't be hours and hours and hours that they're waiting. They would be expecting, us to challenge them for their credentials. Absolutely. You need to see their credentials, right? They absolutely need to show you those. In most cases, they're going to have a business card, or ID, etc. Get a copy of that, or attain a business card, from them. Really important. The inspector must state, so just like an audit with an airline, as an example, or any other audit with a customer of ours, when there's going to be a bit of an opening meeting. Now it's going to be very brief because they want to get out into the work site as quickly as possible, but they need to explain the purpose of their inspection. That has to do that, because that's going to set the scope of their visit. That's really important. And everybody on this call is empowered. And if you need backup, you've got backup. Laura's the axe. You know what I'm saying? She don't mess around. But no, you've got a lot of people on this call.
That is not true. I'm not the axe. I'm very nice.
No, she is. She is very nice. But she's a great advocate. Bob's a great advocate. You have a number. Rob. You have a number of really great advocates. So you need to feel comfortable with standing your ground on this. This is really important. So the reason they have to share the scope with you is because that is the only areas that they're permitted to inspect. So as an example, if they're there for cabin cleaning, right, then they're not there to inspect the GSE shop, nor are they permitted to inspect the GSE shop. If they're there to observe ground handling, the epicenter of the complaint or other of the three areas of concern that triggered the inspection was in ground handling, then they're going to observe ground handling, and they're not going to observe the GSE shop, and they're not going to go to cabin cleaning. Does everyone follow me on that?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, sir.
But
Understood.
here's the tricky part, right? You're like, well, you just told me, well, there's always a catch, right? If an OSHA inspector, by simply being in an area, right, observes a concern from a distance, and that observation is a risk that could cause an employee harm, then that will open the scope of the inspection. So here's the reason why I say that. So, many of our locations, may have a GSE shop, out back. I'm not trying to pick on GSE, it's just an example. Out back of the admin office or adjacent to an admin, office. If you just somehow walk through the GSE shop on your way to the ramp, and there is a, flammable left out of the flammable cabinet, and they see it, could they cite us for that?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep. They
I think so too.
absolutely could. Because that is now in scope by very nature of being in an area that, that they observed, right? They didn't sort of walk over there and, you walk through a door, unescorted and got there. Just a matter of naturally navigating to the operational area. They observed that. That would be in scope. So we just need to be considerate of, of those things. If the inspector requests to interview an employee, is that permissible? Absolutely. It is absolutely permissible for them to interview an employee, and it's absolutely permissible for us to ask them what specific questions they're going to ask our employees and write them down before the interviews take place. We're not permitted to be in the room when the employees are being interviewed. It is permissible, though, in a union environment for a shop steward to be in the room. But even though we can't be in the room, it's important that we're close by, so that, when the interview's done and the OSHA inspector comes out, that again, they're not roaming around, on their own. From a pictures perspective, so same thing with that file we were talking about, that, OSHA XYZ file. If an inspector takes a picture of something, we just happen to notice that they casually took a picture, we need to take the same photo in the same angle that they took it. We need to have the exact same copy, like for like, of all the evidence that they captured before that inspector leaves. So just keep that in mind. If they take a photo, we're going to take a photo. As innocuous as it might be, as benign as whatever it is that they took a photo of, we need to have the same photo. This would be very rare for us up at the top, at least in our current operating environment. But if an inspector, for whatever reason, decides to do some form of sampling, maybe it's air sampling, or it might be another industrial hygiene sampling, like maybe they want to do a noise sampling, etc. Then it's important for us to know that. Because we are almost 100% of the time going to want to do parallel sampling, so that they have their results, through their third-party vendor, or one in which they would have performed their own, and we have our own sampling that we can compare side by side. Again, it sets us up to ensure that we're able to challenge any citations that may or may not be an outcome of the on-site inspection. And they're required to tell us that. Sometimes OSHA inspectors be really clever, and they may have some form of air sampling dosimetry on them. So that is an opportunity for us to actually push back a little bit, and schedule a timing of when air sampling could be performed, because we have every right to perform the sampling side by side. And those would to some degree conversations that both myself and Laura most likely would have in conjunction with that inspector or the regional office, respectively. What to expect post inspection? Well, there's going to be a closing conference, but that it won't look like a typical closing conference from an audit, because in most cases it's not going to be the same day. There's a lot of things that that OSHA inspector has looked at, reviewed, documents that they're going to review, pictures that they're going to want to review, and so it's more likely that the closing conference would take place several days later, and that would be scheduled, of course. And so they're generally pretty good about working out, a schedule for that. And, you would absolutely want to make sure that your regional leadership, Kel, myself, potentially Laura, are on the line when that closing conference takes place. Because we want to have a clear understanding of, again, in the best case scenario, no findings, no citations. Here's just some observations and move on. But particularly if there are citations that are being commented on, these are some of our first opportunities to, number one, understand what they're bringing forward, clarify policies or what the inspector observed, so that we can push back, we can negotiate those items in real time. So don't be surprised, if the closing conference doesn't happen on the same day. And then finally, if citations are issued, I had already mentioned that, please, we need to make sure that you notify Kel, immediately, and your respective, regional operational leader immediately, so that we can action, follow up. Any questions on this guidance document? That is very new. This has not been published before. So this will be published post learning call today.
Hey, Gino, I've got a quick question for you.
Yes.
You say that the OSHA inspector can turn and basically pull anybody into a one-on-one meeting in an office to interview them.
Yes.
If you have a male inspector and he wants to pull a female employee one-on-one into an office, and that female employee is reluctant for whatever reason, what then?
So, there's a couple ways that we could work through that. Either, this is not a sort of a closed door, meeting. Maybe it's a conference room or an office, doors left open, or there's an opportunity to have that genuine conversation with the inspector. Look, she's uncomfortable being one-on-one. We would like to have another employee present, as that's another way to go about it. But there's a few different ways that we could work, that we could work through that. But the OSHA inspector, would have to be accommodating to that concern.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, that's a good question.
Hey, Gino, in reference to what we were just talking about right then, wouldn't it be prudent to have maybe HR or an admin in there with that female employee, or even with a male employee, if it's still male on male or female on male?
So that may be a good alternative. in that, again, that could be worked out with the, with the inspector. It's just typically that, that first, the initial inspection or the initial interview from the inspector is he or she is going to want to have that one-on-one, to be able to have sort of uninterfered, feedback, at least from their perspective. So that's going to always be their first go-get. But again, if we have a situation where it's a female that's uncomfortable, or even a male, let's not put labels, right? Even if a male is uncomfortable one-on-one with a female, inspector, those workarounds, whether it's an admin, whether it's HR, whether it is another employee, so just to have another, fellow human being in the room, those are options that, that can be utilized.
Can I just add something to what you were just discussing? In my experience, I did experience an OSHA inspection in my previous job, and I was escorting the OSHA inspector, and they did advise me that I would not be in the interview, but for me to select ask employees who is willing to be interviewed and to have a witness or a shop store. Which way they're comfortable. So they do consider the employees, and that communication is, is there.
Yeah, no, that's good. So any other questions on the inspection guide? I know that's a lot of information, and hopefully, the number of inspections, in person, we keep to 0 or a minimum, and folks don't have to go through that experience. But first and foremost, if you do, you're going to be well supported. And if you do, it's important for a number of reasons to ensure that we leverage those processes as we discussed, today, for the best outcome possible. So one of the things I wanted to share real quick, with everybody, we talk about, citations, what does that mean for the organization? What's our skin in the game? Well, certainly, there are financial penalties and civil penalties. There could be criminal charges. Those are very rare. But there is jail time. That is a potential. But the other thing is reputational, right? And so what you're looking at right now is just the United States Department of Labor webpage, and any organization that receives a citation, it goes on a public record that is accessible by anybody with internet access, and it's published, and these citations are active for a period of 5 years. So you'll note that GSI, as well as Donata, are both represented here. So there is a reputational component here that we need to be aware of. And that's not unique to us. So just to be fair, here's Swissport. As well as Menzies. So these are a matter of public record. So what citations could we expect? Well, there are maximum penalties that are outlined in the OSHA field manual, both serious and other than serious. But they both have maximums of up to 12.5K. The determinations of that are based on a number of factors: potential and of injury, and the severity of that injury should it occur. Willful or repeated could be up to 124,000 per violation. I mean, willful is, they have to prove that we knowingly knew of the concerns, knew of the conditions, knew of the behaviors, and we did nothing. That is considered willful. Not meeting the posting requirements, failure to abate, that is fix or remediate the concern. Those can have daily charges or compounding charges. So what determines the penalties themselves and how high on the tier they may be assessed? The gravity of the violation, again, that concern being raised, a lockout tagout not being applied. What's the risk of the occurrence of an injury, and then if one occurred, then how severe would that injury have been? That's going to weigh into that. The size of the employer's business, also weighs into it. As I said in the other document, the good faith of the employer. So by good faith, just another way of saying our standard of care, our level of professionalism, our commitment and response to the deadlines that are outlined, and the employer's history of previous violations. So that's really, really important. And the reason why that's important, the citations that I just showed you on that very public space are active for 5 years. And if any of the citations that we already have, if we have a violation of a similar type in a period of 3 years since that citation was issued, the value of that single citation could be 10 times the maximum. That would make a serious citation, or a serious repeat citation could be $120,000. Same thing with other than serious. So you're really, really important that, number one, we would prevent the conditions by which would drive an OSHA inspection in the first place. If an OSHA inspection takes place, doing the right thing, and certainly avoiding any repeat citations. The citation process itself, won't get into this with a whole lot of detail, but there is a follow-up process. There is a way to challenge the citations, either an informal conference or what they call a formal conference. And it's fair to say that any citation that we were to receive at a minimum, and again, as I mentioned, everybody on this call has very committed folks that that are going to act on your behalf. But for any citation that we receive, more than likely, we're going to have at a minimum go through the informal process, conference process. And what does that mean? It simply means that we are, once the closing conference with the location is done, that process is done, they evaluate, they ultimately issue a citation. We receive that citation as an entity. We are going to, at minimum, sit down with OSHA, seek to understand why they ultimately made that conclusion, and try to fight to either reduce or eliminate that citation if we have the evidence to prove it, right? We're going to go back to that OSHA folder, right, that was created, and all those photos that were taken, the documents that were shared, and we're going to try to make that case. And so you may have a situation where you have an other than serious, a violation or citation that, let's say, was $6,000. We may be able to, reduce that down to a de minimis category, which could be zero. Or we have a serious citation that may be $8,000, and we'll be able to negotiate that down to other than serious. It happens all the time, and at a minimum, that is the step that we would get to. It would be pretty rare that we would go to that second step, which would be a formal conference, or we could even take it even further, and these things could go all the way to court. But that is very rare. Any questions on that at all?
No.
Okay. All right, so switching subjects, a little bit less intense, our recordable injury rate and lost time incident frequency. So all these indicators should be pretty familiar to everybody on the call. We measure safety in leading indicators and in lagging indicators. But one of those indicators in lagging is the RIR and the LTI. Well, what is the recordable injury rate all about? Well, the recordable injury rate, it's a mathematical calculation. It's used by OSHA that describes the number of employees per 100 full-time employees that have been involved in an OSHA recordable injury or illness. So what OSHA has done in order to be able to compare industries of various scale and individual sites of various scales, they came up with the recordable injury rate, which sort of nullifies, or you're able to measure, industries of varying size and locations of varying size, really using the same rule book, if you will, the same set of parameters. And so the recordable injury rate is calculated by taking the number of OSHA recordable injuries, multiplying it by 200,000, dividing by the total number of hours worked for the period that you're trying to measure. So if it's for a month, we're only taking those labor hours for that month and making and doing that calculation. 200,000, right? Well, where did that 200,000 come from? 200,000 is representative of 100 employees working full time, right? 40 hours, 50 weeks a year, etc. So that's where the 200,000 comes from. The same calculation applies for lost time injury frequency. The only difference is that you replace the number of OSHA recordable incidents by the number of lost time incidents. Well, what would we consider an OSHA recordable injury? Well, first of all, any injury is too many, and our focus as an organization is to protect our people and ensure that we drive a zero incident workplace. But recordable injury rate and LTIF, they measure severity. They measure injuries of a certain severity. So what is recordable, right? Well, in a tragic event of a death, a fatality, that would be considered a OSHA recordable. Days away from work, so a lost time injury, right? That is absolutely recordable. Restricted work or a job a transfer to another job as a result of a work-related injury, that is considered OSHA recordable. Medical treatment beyond first aid. Well, what does that mean? That's pretty broad. It absolutely is. That would be things like stitches. That would be things like a cast, things like physical therapy. And that's also why it's really important for all of you to have good relationships with the clinics, your local clinics, the designated clinic that we've assigned or determined for your respective locations, because those doctors, those practitioners should know the job descriptions of the employees that work for us. That's going to be really helpful to be able to align to potential treatment that they may provide. Because if they understand the job roles, then that may curtail certain restrictions that they put on follow-ups. And that they may be better able to work with us to prevent an OSHA recordable from happening in the first place, while providing the standard of care to the employee that the employee deserves. A significant injury or illness diagnosed by a physician or other licensed healthcare provider, that could, again, that diagnosis, being a fracture, that diagnosis being a broken arm, as an example, all those things would be considered recordable. So let's run through some scenarios. So I mentioned earlier, I'm going to stop presenting real quick. I mentioned earlier that button, that conversation button. Everyone ever able to find it?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes. All right. Very good. All right. I see some folks. I see some folks responding. As well. You guys are too much. You guys are a bunch of hams. All right, everyone. Round one. All right. Here we go. No Googling. I can hear you type. And in fact, the meeting chat shows me when you're typing. I'm just kidding. All right, so starting out with just answering sort of yes or no in the meeting chat, and then we'll kind of drill it down from there. Let's take on some of these scenarios. So, team member, after working in the bag room for 2 hours, reported a lower back injury. Nurse line was called and recommended an ice pack. Is that OSHA recordable or not?
No.
No.
I don't think so.
So respond via the meeting chat if you would, please. But awesome. It looks like most folks got that right in here. I'm not sure what Phil was responding to there, but I'm just kidding. I see your other response there, Phil. So let's see. Arnisa, why is that no? You can respond by voice now.
Can you hear me?
I can.
If I'm correct that you called the nurse triage, they said there was no medical attention and they didn't have any medical attention for any type of injury, correct?
Yep, very good. All right, so let's take that a step further. Okay, so opening it back up to the group. So same situation, right? Team members working in the bag room, 2 hours reported lower back injury. Ice pack was recommended, and there was a recommendation, around the remainder of the day, having the remainder of the day off. So Donata decides to send the team member home for the remainder of the day. Is it now OSHA recordable or not?
Are you talking to me?
The entire group. But do you have what would you say though, Arnisa, since you're on the line?
Shucks, okay. So you said that, because I had my headset in, I knew I should open up my big mouth. It's the same person injured, and let me see what I would say. I would say no.
Okay. All right, good. So Stephen Curtis, I noticed you said yes. Just curious. Why yes on that one?
Oh wait, you know what? I want to butt in. If he lost time, it may be a yes, but you can answer it, Stephen. I'm sorry.
Are you changing your mind? Are you being influenced by Stephen Curtis?
No, but when you said lost time, because I didn't hear that with my headset, but I'm gonna let Stephen win it for the $10,000 because we're on Family Feud. Go, Stephen.
Yeah, Gino, I said employee loss, so I think that'll be portable.
Okay. All right. So in this case, it's a little tricky. So one of the things that OSHA has afforded us is they don't count the first day, right? So the day of injury, as an example. So in this case, even if ice pack was recommended, in this case, there was look, I just take the rest of the day off. That is completely acceptable, and that would not be OSHA recordable. Now, if they miss the next day, right, and lose that next day, that is absolutely OSHA recordable.
Gino,
right.
we didn't win the $10,000 then, right?
From your
Yeah,
Johnny.
yeah.
All right. If the day of the incident, he lost that day because he went to the hospital or to the clinic or something, but the next day he's okay to go to work, it's not OSHA recordable. But
That
if
is
he
correct.
lost an additional day, they give it 3 days off or 3 days, whatever, with medical restriction, means it's an OSHA recordable, right? But the first day is not counting.
Right. The first day is a gimme. The day of is a gimme.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Yep. All right. So while connecting a tow bar, team member dropped the tow bar on their foot. After speaking with the nurse, they recommended that the employee be sent to the clinic. Is it OSHA recordable or not?
Recordable.
Not only if they go to the hospital, correct? Not the clinic.
All right. So let's use the chat feature first. I heard a couple of responses. So
I can't see only my chat. I can't see everybody's conversation.
okay, I got you. All right. So I got a number of responses here. No, yes, not yet. So probably the best answer at that point is not yet, because we don't know enough. Just going to just being sent to the clinic doesn't necessarily make it recordable. You know, it's going to be the diagnosis and the treatment, right? That's really what's going to drive it. So we take that a step further. Once at the clinic, the employee was instructed to be off work for a period of 6 days. Is it OSHA recordable or not? Yeah, you guys are awesome. That's exactly right. It would be OSHA recordable at that point. Okay, at one of our MAS facilities, employees were moving mail containers and a team member was hit with one of the containers and knocked to the ground. Nurse line recommended team member be sent to the clinic. At the clinic, physician found a fracture to the left wrist. OSHA recordable or not? Very good. Sean Fairbanks, why was that OSHA recordable?
It was a severe injury, resulted in a break of his arm or something like that. So the doctor's definitely going to have some follow-up care and some other missed time potentially, but it was a severe injury to the employee.
Excellent. Very good. Okay.
Gino, let me just ask a question real quick here, because I've seen it done on the other end. What if he had an injury and didn't report it and he was playing football somewhere and then claims it? How can we tell that really happened on an incident there at work, then he goes to the clinic?
Well, so I think, well, yeah, we
Can
certainly
I answer that?
Go ahead.
Can I answer? So in this particular incident, it shows Gino had stated that the employee did fall. So with them falling, regardless if it may have happened outside, it's going to be caught under us because there was an act that caused it, versus if the employee came in and said, hey, I'm not feeling well or something like along those lines, then we might be able to scoot it to the side and say, hey, this didn't happen here. But because there was a fall involved, I think we would have to be responsible for the injury.
Correct. Yeah. There's a direct link, to something that happened in the work environment that caused it. However, Dan, to a broader sense, we certainly have cases where employees, have, leveraged the system, and so when we look at any injury, we won't get into it today because it can be a little bit cumbersome, but any injury that occurs, we actually look at it in three buckets. Is it OSHA recordable? Is it compensable? Meaning, is it an acceptable claim, for workers' comp, right? And was it a non-preventable? Meaning that it was an act of God in the work, in the work environment, or somebody else, some third party, did something to us. There was nothing on behalf of Donata that could have prevented that injury from occurring, et cetera, et cetera. So we look at, an injury in those three buckets. So just, every single one of them. Just to be clear and a bit broad on your question. All right. Team member is transported to the hospital by ambulance. Recordable or not? Okay, so we have a lot of yes and no's. For those that have said no, can somebody just speak up and kind of explain why it's no?
Haven't received a diagnosis of modified duty, time away, or prescription drugs.
Okay, and someone that may have said yes. Why would it be yes?
Because I said so.
It's David. David just walked in.
What call is this one?
This is on OSHA recordability.
Oh, excellent.
Yeah.
I heard the question. The answer is no.
Yeah. The answer is no. The answer is no. But nobody spoke up on the yes. That yes isn't a terrible answer, but it certainly is there's a level of severity, generally speaking, when an ambulance is used. But ultimately, it's going to come down to the diagnosis and ultimately treatment. All right.
Gino, but pretty much what we need to do is what you say first, right? The first, take it to the hospital or call to the trial line. That first day is like a plus for us. As long as they don't say you need to lose time of work or diagnostic you with a major injury, the first day, for that reason, at the first day is no until we have the diagnosis, right?
It depends. In this case, the ambulance by itself isn't OSHA recordable. Ultimately, it will be the diagnosis and the treatment that is provided. All right, round 2. Cabin cleaning agent experienced a sprain strain injury to their right shoulder area. After visiting the clinic, they were given work restrictions. OSHA recordable or not?
You have a voting thing?
Yeah.
Oh, look, that's awesome.
Yeah. You guys are fast, man. So the yes answers, so it's a little bit of a trick question. So I did set everybody up a little bit. So I apologize, up front. So work restrictions, by themselves could be OSHA recordable. Okay, so everyone's paying attention and focused, and I'm grateful. But for a work restriction to be OSHA recordable, it has to limit that person's ability to do their normal job function, right? So we have to, one of their job roles has to be affected, by that. So if the restriction to the cabin cleaning agent was unable to lift and carry out objects, limited use of right arm for 2 hours per day, as an example, that's just an example, that would absolutely limit that person's ability to do their normal job function. And so in that case, then it would absolutely be OSHA recordable. So we always have to put that sort of, look through that lens when we're evaluating the restrictions that have been provided. And that's where the job descriptions come in handy, as well. So really, really important. Now, most of the time, a restriction, from a clinic is going to be recordable, but there's an opportunity to take a look at that. So we just need to be aware of it. Okay. While climbing the ladder on a K-loader, team member loses grip and incurs a fall. Nurse recommends clinic visit. Post-visit, team member prescribed 2 days off. This is their Saturday and Sunday per their schedule. OSHA recordable or not?
It's recordable.
It is. The team is absolutely spot on. And the reason for that is OSHA doesn't care if it's a, if it's a scheduled day off. Once it's prescribed, the lost time is lost time. During the loading of hold 5 on a 777-300, team member reports lower back injury. Nurse line recommends ibuprofen, over-the-counter ibuprofen. Recordable or not? No is absolutely right. If it is prescription strength, or it must be a medicine that get like over the counter, not over the counter, one that you have to go to a pharmacy for, like Vicodin, etc., then it would absolutely be recordable. Okay, just a few more. Round 3. Team member is prescribed massages as part of a physical therapy regimen. Recordable or not? Ooh, there's some contradiction here. I like it. It's good. So this one's a little bit of a tough one.
Did you say it was prescribed, Gino?
Gino, was it prescribed from, did he get hurt at work and then it was prescribed?
So this team member was hurt at work, and it was he or she was prescribed massages as part of the physical therapy regimen.
Is it in Palm Beach?
If it doesn't restrict their duties, then it shouldn't be recordable if they can still work, but they're just going to, I mean, I don't think we would be recording someone who's going for physical therapy on something else if they're continuing to work.
So in this,
but that's
so yeah.
compensation, right? That hit a worker compensation is recordable, no?
So here's the deal. So physical therapy would, generally it would be recordable, but OSHA does make an exception to hot and cold treatment and massages. If it goes beyond that, from medical sense, trying to get away from Phil's comment there, go Patriots. If it goes beyond the massage, then it would be considered OSHA recordable.
Okay, I'm raising the question because of how the statement was made. It said the massages were part of the physical therapy, not massages were the physical therapy. So part of leads you to believe that there was additional therapy involved other than a massage.
Agreed.
Okay. All right. Shoot the messenger. All right.
You use prescribed, so I figured that's the key word in that.
All right.
Just ask my wife. She always says I'm the right fighter, so I got to be right.
All right. I'll take it.
Hey, Gino,
yes.
Let me ask you this. So if an employee has an injury and they go to the clinic to get checked out and they recommend therapy, but yet the employee says, well, I don't want to lose time. I'm good. I want to go back to work. But they still do therapy. Is that still a recordable? If the employee doesn't want to lose any time and goes back to work, regular duty.
It is. Yeah. Unfortunately, so once it is prescribed, right? Once that goes on the piece of paper, right? Whether that's a restriction that does limit the employee's ability to do their normal job function, it lost time, right? That's beyond the initial day, right, of the report, or physical therapy that is above and beyond massages. Once it is on paper, even if the employee says, no, I don't want it, right? That has to be logged on the OSHA 300 log, unfortunately. That's a very good question. Okay, 3 more. Team member was involved in a voluntary outing for the company. Voluntary. Was injured and received medical treatment beyond first aid. Recordable or not? Some good debate here. Okay, so the key word on this one is voluntary, meaning it's not mandatory to go to this company outing. If this situation were to take place, OSHA would not consider this a recordable injury. Now, the case would be compensable, meaning that workers' comp would pay for it, but it would not be OSHA recordable or required to be on the OSHA 300 log. Now, if the event was mandatory, or you had to be there, like if you were the project coordinator, like I had to be there to coordinate the event, then if I was injured in that scenario and I was the project coordinator and had to be there, then that would be OSHA recordable. So the key word there is voluntary. During a business trip, an employee was injured while they were at the hotel after checking in for the evening. They received treatment above first aid. OSHA recordable or not? I guess the question might be that, what were they doing to cause them to be injured, that late in the evening? But we won't get into that.
Would it depend on the injury?
It was a massage.
Phil, you're killing me. You're killing me, Phil.
Just a help. I'm trying to be a helper here.
You're always helpful, Phil.
I think we treat it just like if it happened in the station because you're on duty. You're on a business trip, you're on duty. So depending on the injury, if it's recordable or not, depending on the.
He fell in the shower. Who knows? Yeah, he's working.
Yeah. So actually, OSHA disagrees, and so once you check into the hotel, for the evening, they consider that your domicile, your home away from home. And so if you are injured, unless you're sort of, facilitating a training or, conference or whatever, when you checked in, you're considered in your domicile, and that would be considered not recordable. It would still be compensable, but it would not be recordable.
Question?
Yes, sir.
Since many people are working out of their homes, in an office home or whatever the case may be, they got injured in the office at this special time, and they were taken to the hospital and were treated by a doctor. Is that recordable?
It could be. It could be.
But don't think about it, Phil.
What's that?
It could be. It's a good question.
Hey, Gino, so in seriousness, getting back to the one about the hotel.
Yes.
Is there a period of time that OSHA doesn't agree to say it's a work comp injury? So I know you say when you check into the hotel, but if we have a conference meeting and it's down in a conference room in a hotel, and an employee's going down there and they trip and fall on their way to the conference, would that be covered then, or would that still not be covered until they got into the conference room?
Yeah, no. So in that case, it would both be compensable from a workers' comp perspective, and then OSHA would probably look at that as recordable.
Okay.
Yep.
So we're basically looking at the time that you're in your room, your downtime for that period of time that you're on the road. Where just like once we go home, even overall salary, we're all on the clock 24/7. Once you're home, and until you leave that and get back to the job, it's not going to be considered a work injury.
That's right.
Yeah.
Thank you,
All right.
Gino.
Last and final. Team member was traveling for business and had rented a car. While en route to the job site, they were involved in a traffic accident which resulted in injury above first aid. Recordable or not recordable?
Did you say above first aid, Gino?
Above first aid, yep. Beyond first aid. Awesome. Yeah, that's right. So that would absolutely be recordable. Now, if the employee took a detour, did an assortment of things, took a stop at Walmart, maybe got a massage, did what they did, had to do it, and they were injured during the course of that travel, right, that detour, then in that case, that injury would not be compensable, nor would it be OSHA recordable. So important to know. All right. You guys have been really great sports. It's been really great to be able to, see the conversation on the screen and the dialogue. You guys have asked really good questions. We've talked about a lot today. It took a little bit more time than I had anticipated, but we're still sort of under the limit. Any final questions before we close the Learning Academy call today?
Hey, Gino, I have a scenario, like going back to the ice pack scenario where we called the nurse triage and they just said, apply some ice pack, but you can take the rest of the day off. Now, what if their next 2 days were their normal days off?
Mm-hmm.
And then, say like they were supposed to come back on Monday, but they wanted an additional day. So would that start the employee?
Okay.
Okay. Would he or she need, would that be considered lost time, or does the lost time have to be medically given?
So we would be held accountable for both. So that employee needs to come back to work, on their next working day. Otherwise, if they quote unquote, decide they can't really do that, it can't go to, sick time if it's a work related, or alleged, work related event. They would either need at that point ultimately call the nurse back, potentially go to the clinic, at that point, and then the clinic, may decide, lost time or restricted duty. If the employee calls up a manager or supervisor and says, hey, I really want to just take this next day, one more day off because I think I just, that would really help me out and I'm going to feel much better on Tuesday, as an example, and the supervisor or manager acknowledges and says, absolutely, take that next day. As soon as we did that's a lost time day.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so lost time doesn't have to be a medical, it doesn't have to be documented medically.
It may not, yes, that's true.
Okay.
We're going to be held accountable either way.
Right, okay.
Anybody else? All right, everybody. Thanks so much for your time. Have a great rest of the day. I'll share the content from this meeting here shortly. Take care, everybody.